Rimuru moved when the room hesitated, not because he was compelled to act, but because he understood that hesitation, left unchecked, becomes disorder. The silence around Guy's words carried weight, the kind that pressed down on every subordinate present, forcing them to measure their responses against invisible thresholds of tolerance. Rain's sobbing, Miseri's rigid composure, Diablo's restrained exasperation. All of it was noise until it produced something actionable. So Rimuru cut through it and forced structure back into the room, calling for reports one at a time, restoring sequence where emotion had briefly taken control. It worked, mostly, because systems tend to stabilize when authority is clear. Yet even in that controlled flow, a disruption emerged, small enough to seem irrelevant, but sharp enough to expose the underlying weaknesses in the hierarchy. Khan stepped forward, bowed his head, and violated protocol with deliberate intent. "I know, my lord, that it would normally be an unforgivable cardinal sin," he began, and in doing so, he acknowledged the rule even as he broke it. That was the first signal that this was not impulsive defiance, but calculated risk. He asked for Miseri's forgiveness, not his own, and in doing so, he shifted the burden of judgment from offense to outcome. Miseri's reaction was immediate and severe, not because she rejected the request, but because she understood what it meant. Authority had been bypassed in her name, and that carried implications she could not afford to accept. But Guy interrupted, not to punish, but to evaluate. He recognized growth in the act, or at least utility, and rewarded it by releasing Miseri. In that moment, the system adjusted. Rules remained, but exceptions had been proven possible, and that was enough to destabilize expectations for everyone watching. Rain misread that shift entirely, as expected. Where Miseri saw structural risk, Rain saw opportunity, and where Masora saw limits, Rain saw inconsistency. Masora's intervention was controlled, precise, and withdrawn the moment resistance surfaced, demonstrating an understanding of boundaries that preserved her position. Rain lacked that entirely. She protested loudly, questioned the logic, and exposed her own ignorance in the process. "Why am I still kneeling here after Miseri got released?" she demanded, and the answer was obvious to everyone except her. Guy's response was not immediate punishment, but something more effective. He forced her to confront the absence of her own reasoning. "Do you even understand why what you did was wrong?" he asked, and her empty stare confirmed the answer before she spoke. Ignorance, in that room, was a liability greater than guilt, because it meant unpredictability. The matter of the liquor surfaced next, not as a moral issue, but as a logistical inconsistency. Rare, inaccessible, and consumed in excess, it pointed to a system breach rather than simple misconduct. Masora defended Rain's character with measured restraint, insisting on principles rather than innocence. And Guy listened, not out of trust, but because consistency mattered more than loyalty. Then Diablo intervened, and the tone shifted immediately. His defense was unnatural, his reasoning unconvincing, and both Rimuru and Guy recognized it at once. Suspicion replaced irritation, and observation replaced interrogation. Diablo broke under that pressure, not because he was forced, but because he was understood too quickly to maintain a lie. The truth reframed everything. The liquor was not stolen, but supplied, and the supplier had acted with intent. Diablo had traded it for paintings, and those paintings carried value far beyond aesthetics. Rimuru's image, reproduced and distributed, had become currency in a transaction he had not authorized. That was not a trivial offense. It was a breach of control over identity, and in a world where perception influenced power, that breach carried consequences. Soe moved immediately, securing evidence, initiating searches, and formalizing the response with the efficiency of someone who understood that speed prevents escalation. Diablo's collapse into silence was not submission, but delayed calculation, rendered useless by timing. Meanwhile, Rain continued her explanation, reframing indulgence as strategy. "These were necessary for the advanced psychological warfare we were engaged in," she insisted. And while the claim bordered on absurdity, it contained a fragment of truth. She had acquired information, not cleanly, not intentionally, but effectively. Locations, force composition, operational hints, all extracted under the guise of indulgence. The room did not react immediately because it needed to recalibrate. Value had emerged from incompetence, and that complicated judgment. Rimuru recognized it first, not because he trusted Rain, but because he understood patterns. Results distort perception, and once results exist, process becomes negotiable. Guy resisted that shift, but even he could not ignore the outcome. Rain had delivered something no one else had, and that forced a reassessment. The decision that followed was not forgiveness, but balance. Punishment alone would discard value, and praise alone would reinforce failure, so they applied both. Praise and punishment in equal measures seemed to be in order, Rimuru stated, and Guy agreed with visible reluctance. Rain was released, and her reaction confirmed the flaw in the outcome. She interpreted balance as validation, not correction. Gratitude surfaced, but it was shallow, immediately replaced by self-congratulation and misplaced confidence. "I knew that Sir Rimuru would see me as how I truly am," she declared. And in that moment, she revealed that she had learned nothing of restraint. Misora encouraged her, Mizeri acknowledged her, and the system reinforced behavior it could not fully control. Rimuru observed the pattern without intervening further, recognizing that correction at this stage would yield diminishing returns. Some individuals adapt to structure, others exploit it, and Rain belonged firmly in the latter category. Redirecting her was no longer efficient. Redirecting others, however, still was. So he shifted focus away from internal inefficiencies and toward external threats, where clarity could still produce advantage. The reports resumed, and the tone changed accordingly, moving from interpersonal correction to strategic evaluation. Vega emerged as the first major concern, not because of raw strength, but because of growth mechanics that mirrored Rimuru's own. Consumption as evolution, adaptation as survival, and escalation as inevitability defined his trajectory. The absorption of Orlia's abilities, particularly her capacity to produce God-class equipment without degradation, transformed him from a singular threat into a multiplying one. This was not linear power increase, it was exponential potential. Rimuru recognized the pattern immediately, and that recognition carried weight because it was personal. He understood what Vega could become because he had followed a similar path himself. That made the threat tangible, not theoretical. Soe's report added another layer, introducing instant motion as a skill rather than a spell, eliminating the predictability that traditional movement systems relied upon. No calculations, no delay, no warning, only displacement. That redefined engagement parameters entirely, forcing them to consider a battlefield where positioning could no longer be controlled with certainty. Mai Furuki's role as the user of that skill elevated the concern further, because precision combined with unpredictability produces disproportionate impact. Each enemy described shared a common trait. They were not overwhelming individually, but they were specialized, efficient, and collectively disruptive. Even the less loyal participants, such as those coerced under Ultimate Dominion, added complexity rather than reducing it. Control replaced allegiance, and that meant their enemies' forces were not bound by conventional morale or loyalty structures. The discussion then shifted to the core threats, and the tone hardened accordingly. Velzard, Zerario, and Feldway were not variables to be managed, but constants to be endured. Rimuru's prior encounter with Feldway had already established a critical insight. He did not engage to win, but to observe, to delay, and to manipulate perception. Zerario, by contrast, represented the opposite extreme, a combatant defined by consistency, discipline, and an absence of exploitable psychological weaknesses. Diablo's assessment reinforced this, describing him as a cold, seasoned warrior, whose lack of variation made him dangerous precisely because it eliminated uncertainty. Yet even within that stability, an anomaly appeared. Zerario's behavior shifted after Feldway's reappearance, becoming more mechanical, more constrained, suggesting external interference rather than internal choice. Kigali's testimony provided the missing link, confirming that control was not constant, but triggered, applied with timing and precision. This led to the emerging theory that domination required conditions, recognition, presence, connection, and that breaking those conditions created openings. Rimuru articulated this cautiously, proposing that the skill's effectiveness depended on direct awareness of the target, a limitation that could be exploited. Guy challenged the simplicity of the theory, but the accumulated evidence supported it, particularly the delayed domination of isolated targets like Pico and Garasha. The conclusion was imperfect, but actionable, and in their situation, that was sufficient. The final layer of analysis introduced a more unsettling possibility, one that reframed everything they had observed. If Michael's abilities were not merely shared, but duplicated through a mechanism like parallel existence, then the distinction between user and proxy dissolved entirely. Feldway would not be borrowing power. He would be manifesting it independently, effectively multiplying the threat without diluting it. Rimuru recognized the implication immediately, not because it was explained to him, but because he could imagine executing it himself. That recognition carried a weight none of the others could fully articulate. It meant that their enemy was not just distributing strength, but replicating presence, creating multiple points of control that operated under a unified will. The limitations of ultimate dominion, its reliance on recognition and proximity, provided a narrow window of resistance, but the broader system remained intact. Guy's warning cut through the analysis with blunt clarity, reminding Rimuru that overanalysis, while useful, becomes fatal when it delays action. Rimuru accepted that without argument, not because he agreed entirely, but because he understood the cost of hesitation. They had extracted what they could from the information available, identified patterns, and established provisional strategies. That was enough for now. So when he finally turned to the last unresolved variable, the question carried no curiosity, only intent. "So who was that Jahil guy?" he asked.